A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. This linguistics expression refers to the influence that a community's socio-political situation can have on its perception of its relationship with its dialect or official language. And this is precisely the foundation of my paper, the relationship that speakers of a particular dialect have with it. Dialect is our mother tongue, transmitted by our ancestors, the language of family and of the deepest and most sincere feelings. What makes the Italian linguistic scenario special is the fact that Italy is the European country with the largest number of dialects, and that some of them are very different from each other, even though they are spoken in geographically close locations. In fact, in some cases, they are more similar to other languages than to Italian itself. Dialect has always constituted an important cue in many fields. In fact, it is essential to draw attention to two figures, who, although very distant from each other, have the same position in this regard: the poet, writer, and director Pierpaolo Pasolini, and the cartoonist Michele Recchi, also known as Zerocalcare. At first glance, the comparison between Pasolini and Zerocalcare may seem almost unthinkable, yet the language used by the latter has often been compared to the language used by the writer in his early novels, such as Ragazzi di Vita and Una Vita Violenta, published in the late 50s. Pasolini was a restless and rebellious person, always seeking new forms of expression to address the major issues of his time, and one of these forms is precisely dialect. The writer's stance towards dialect has a twofold nature. The first is surely the affective and emotional one, linked to the Friulan of his youthful poems and the bucolic images they evoke. The other, on the other hand, is strictly political. In fact, he strongly opposed the thought that dialects constituted a reason for national fragmentation. On the contrary, he was convinced that the use of dialect was the purest expression of a person's emotions. Zerocalcare has enacted a very innovative process with his works from a linguistic point of view, since dialect has always been seen as a communicative mean used only to express a kind of degradation and ignorance, while in his animated series, Tear Along the Ages, released in 2021 on the Netflix platform, he brings in reflections regarding topics such as politics, philosophy, and psychology, implementing a completely new phenomenon, namely the use of dialect in this kind of productions. The language used by Zero in the series and comics is so-called Romanesco, or Italian of Rome, and can be considered more as an accent than a dialect. Because of this, in adaptation from Romanesco to British English or European Spanish, the difficulties involved in transposing from one language to another relate precisely to the need of maintaining the dialect stratagem even in the other languages, so as not to distort the idea of the author, who evidently thought of it in Romanesco. Tullio De Mauro said that dialect tends to be the language of the heart, of the affections, and of everyday life. In fact, the emotional bond that unites people to their native dialect is often associated with a sense of belonging and cultural identity, which can be very strong, especially in local communities. For in many cases, dialects have been passed down from generation to generation as an integral part of the culture and history of a particular region. The distinction between language and dialect is not based on linguistic elements. Rather, it is more a matter of hierarchy, which places in the common imagination language one step above dialect. In the common sense, dialect is a part of a dimension generally represented by unguarded linguistic behavior, but in reality, it is necessary to remember that every Italian dialect is a language in its own right and can count on its own complete grammar and vocabulary. Since the early years of the Republic, Italian has been an instrument of social ascendancy and emancipation, a way to be increasingly connected and united, while dialect, on the contrary, evoked a sense of limitation, much like embarrassment. But now that much sought-after unity has been achieved, speakers are no longer afraid of dialect, and the latter is finally taking its rightful place in the social landscape. Ultimately, therefore, it is necessary to recognize the importance of preserving and enhancing dialects as part of linguistic and cultural diversity, because the emotional relationship with dialects is in fact an intangible heritage of inestimable value, which must be protected and increased to ensure graded awareness of one's cultural and linguistic roots.